Hey, welcome to Pay It Forward. Today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to make this very sweet little mini quilt. Very shabby in style, fantastic for little girls' rooms. If you would like to make it along with me, simply click on the link in the description below. You can print out your free PDF pattern templates and we can get started. So in order to start our little cupcake wall hanging today, if you have downloaded your PDF templates, you'll have all the measurements, the sizes there ready for you. So we start off with our front panel, centre panel. I have interfaced my fabrics because I want that wall hanging to be quite firm and hold itself nicely. You've got your two side panels and your two top and bottom panels, which form your sort of frame around your little quilt. I'm actually using, instead of quilt batting, I'm using a couple of pieces of wool felt, which will do just as nicely. You will need your applique shapes of your cupcake. So a nice print works best for the little patty pan at the bottom, something really pretty, and then you need your top of your cupcake and then your icing. So we've got those three. They've all got fusible web applied. You'll need an assortment of little buttons to match your project, just to scatter over the icing. You really can embellish that any way you like. You may wish to leave it plain. You might want to add just perhaps a little rosette or something like that. A little artificial flower would look nice as well. That's really up to you. You'll need a little piece of ribbon for the top corner that we're going to put into that seam. So 6mm grosgrain I'm using here, but you can use pretty much anything. I like to add a split ring on that loop so I can really hang it up anywhere at all. Also, once we've assembled our front, we will cut our back quilt piece to suit. Because it's such a little project, it actually works out easier doing that, because everybody's seam allowances tend to be just a little bit different. I don't want to give you a measurement and then it's not quite right, so you're better off cutting it to suit your project. Alright, so to begin with, the first thing we're going to do, we're just going to assemble our front, and we're going to sew our shorter side pieces on first. It doesn't matter which sides, and so it's just right sides together. Your seam allowance is 1/2 centimetre or 5mm, and that carries through for the whole project, that seam allowance. So 5mm, and we'll just sew those sides on, then we'll give them a press. There I have my first two side panels sewn on. You can see that I've pressed that seam out nice and flat. And now we're just going to do exactly the same with the other two. Right sides together. So now we have our little framed up little wall hanging there, and our next step is to fuse on our cupcake pieces. Now there's two ways you can do this. I'm setting this little wall hanging on a diagonal. I just like the idea of that little sort of diamond shape hanging up from the corner, because it can be hung on a little door handle or on a little dresser, particularly like in a little shabby room. It'll look really sweet hanging on a little drawer, perhaps a little drawer knob. So that's why I'm doing it that way, but of course I've made the pattern so that you can flip it and you can make it just nice and central that way. So that's entirely up to you. So I'm just going to offset mine. So I've peeled those backing papers off, and I'm just going to fuse those into place. So I will fuse the patty pan first, and then I will pop my cake top, fuse that one, and then my icing, making sure that that all lines up and have them all fused on together. Now my little shapes are all fused on in place, and I'm going to work stitches around the outside of those shapes. Now I'm using 2 strands of embroidery thread here, and I've chosen a slightly darker pink so that that cupcake there will be outlined nicely. I'm going to be sewing a blanket applique stitch. I'll show you a couple of stitches. I do have a video on my other channel, Lisa Pay, how to sew the blanket applique or buttonhole stitch, and that will show you really up close how to work this stitch if you haven't done it before. There are a couple of ways you can do this. You could of course use a very close little zigzag and machine applique each of those shapes on. I just like the look of this, particularly with a shabby style project, to make this little stitch here, and I'm going to be using the fine perlé on that, just that little section here that's showing of the cake, and probably just a lighter pink for framing up that icing. So I'll just show you a couple of stitches here. I've just come through the back. I've got a knot in the back, and I've just come out right on that edge, and we're going to make our stitches quite small, so probably around about 3mm. Come out right on the edge again, pull through the loop, make sure that your needle is coming out through that loop, and pull that one down, and then you'll just work your way all the way around. Keep those stitches nice and evenly spaced. Through the loop again, and you can see that that will make that nice little binding that will frame that up nicely. So I'm going to work each of those pieces. So there you can see I've worked my blanket applique stitch around all of those pieces, and my next step is we're going to just draw in. You can use the bottom of your template piece if you like. I don't know if you can see there, but I've just drawn in just a little broken line across the bottom there, just to indicate where we're going to put our little row of stitching and our little bow. I'm using a perlé thread, and I'm going to pull one of the colours from my print. I'm going to go for that nice little cold blue, and I'm going to start right on the edge. I've come through, I've knotted my thread, I've come right on the edge there, and I'm just going to make almost like a little, it's really just a little primitive sort of a running stitch, so it looks like it's all gathering up. I'm just going to follow that along. The perlé thread is just a little bit heavier, so it's just that little bit more visible. And I'm just going to come out here is where I want the centre of my two ends to be tied into a little bow. So I'm going to now cut my thread. I'm going to leave enough on there, and then I'm going to work the same stitch from the other side. I'm going to come in the side here, right on the edge, matching up with my line. And I'm going to work the same stitch back again, and then I'm going to end just here and do the same thing and cut my thread. There you see, I've just come from the other side, just stopped just short of that thread, and I've tied a little bow. You can also go ahead if you like and make a couple of stitches from behind over the centre of that bow, which I have, so that that little bow is going to stay exactly where I want it, even though it's still just free falling. It looks really sweet there. So my next step is to add our filler, and that will be applied to the back. A couple of ways that you can do that. You can either use fusible web to put those in place if you have enough fusible web, or you can just use a bit of craft glue. Once we sew the buttons on the front of our little icing piece there, that's going to hold that filler there anyway. So I'm just going to apply that myself with a bit of fusible web there. So I have my felt pieces fused to the back there now, and now I just have to position and sew on my little assortment of buttons wherever you can. Try and pull some colours from your print and perhaps your border, so you've got the colours working all through, and it really just needs to be laid out in a way that you think looks nice. Just sew those on, because we've got our wadding on the back now, of course those buttons will sink nicely into the felt. There you can see I've sewn on all my buttons, and my little mini quilt front is done, and I have just cut a back piece to match. I've just laid it out and cut it with my rotary cutter. So we're going to have right sides together to put our little quilt together, and it's just about matching it up there. Now if you're doing as I am and you're having a little diagonal style, then you need to put in your little ribbon loop in the top corner. I'm just trying to find my right way there. Just matching that one up. So I'm going to have to put in my little ribbon loop here when I'm sewing my seam. So that will actually sit just inside here, and then it will be incorporated. You can see I've made it really small because I'm going to be putting a little split ring on there, so I only need it to just extend out a little bit, and it will sit in there, and I will pin that one there. What I will do first though is I'm going to just cut that top corner so that when I sew around, I will actually sew all the way around with my seam allowance, but I will just sew straight across there so that when I turn that little mini quilt through, it'll be a nice flat tab there. So it's just a matter of snipping that corner off as I sew around. That will encourage me to sew just a little straight piece across there. I'm going to leave, because I've made mine quite firm and I've used a lot of interfacing and heat and bond, I'm going to leave from here to here open as I stitch my seam. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to work my way around, and I'm going to stop here and I'm going to leave this edge open, so I've got plenty of room for turning that one because it's quite firm. If you have just used a softer quilt batting and you feel it's not as firm, you don't have to leave such a large opening. You can perhaps just make it about 6 centimetres. So I'm going to pin that all around and stitch that one together. So you can see there now that I've sewn that seam all the way around. I'm showing you from the back, it's easier to see, and I've left that opening there. You can see how that's just the edge of my little ribbon, and I have just gone across that corner there. So now I'm just going to turn that one through, push the corners out and give it a press. So that's my little wall hanging all turned through and pressed out. You can see that I've just pressed that little edge under there now. Now what I like to do is, you can quilt as much as you like through all of those layers now on your machine or by hand. I usually leave mine just quite plain because it's quite small, but I will machine stitch right in that, on that seam line all the way around, and that will just settle that little front into place. And then I will go around and sew just as close to the edge as I can in a matching black thread all the way around, probably just 2 to 3 mil in, and that will close that little opening also. Alternatively, if you didn't want to do that second row of stitching, you could just slip stitch that opening closed. So there we have my little mini quilt all finished, and I've stitched those 2 lines in there. It's nice and firm, and I've just popped my little split ring, and you can see how good they would look. Remember that you can change the colours. You can make a chocolate cupcake, chocolate icing, caramel icing. You can really mix up the flavours. They look really lovely when you make a whole bunch of them and hang them together in a room. Well, I hope you've enjoyed making this little one with me. They can be quite addictive. I'm going to be making quite a few of these, a lot of little mini quilt designs, so stay tuned for those. Make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss any of them. If you have enjoyed this video, you could give me a thumbs up, that would be beaut. But most of all, remember to pay it forward, because everybody can. And until next time, it's hooroo from me.